should have existed. During this frenzied dance, she'd act as a mother or lover or sister to the men who suffered and died before her. As far as he was concerned, she was able to almost magically transform into whoever these suffering men so desperately needed her to be. Though Joshua and Isabel had been together for almost a decade, and though he recognized that she wasn't perfect, he still marveled at her. He hoped that the men she saved understood the extraordinary measures she took to save them, for to do so she'd left a trail of herself from North Africa to Midway. This trail was filled with her laughter and youth, her faith and strength. Painfully aware of her sacrifices, Joshua often prayed that she wouldn't be an empty shell by the time the war ended. He'd seen too many such shells, and the fear of her becoming one was a burden that weighed heavily upon him. Unfortunately, despite this fear and his consequent longing to mend her as she mended others, he had his own demons, and such monsters rarely set him free. Still absently gazing at the chart, Joshua reflected on what he worried was a growing chasm between Isabel and him. For as much as he admired and loved her, over the past few months he hadn't felt as compelled to spend time at her side. As he saw it, the two of them inhabited different realms. After all, his complete focus centered on the safe and effective operation of Benevolence, and her duty was to ensure the best possible medical care for her patients. Neither task left much room for anything else. And the less time they spent together, the less inclined they were to seek each other out. It was as if, having left the overwhelming demands of the helm or the patients, neither spouse had energy for the other. And so they drifted apart, like kites released into a storm. Saddened by the recent unraveling of his marriage, Joshua turned from the chart and, looking through a window, studied the calm waters surrounding Benevolence. The nearby sea had already witnessed enormous conflicts between American and Japanese warships, and Joshua knew that more such battles were coming. The Japanese, as he'd been briefed many times, needed possession of the nearby islands to protect their recent conquests, and the Allied forces were desperate to stop further Japanese expansion. Benevolence had been sent to these waters because of the looming battles that so often stole his sleep. Downwind from where Joshua stood and stared, a young officer hid in the shadows of the stern. Eyeing a distant island, which was bathed in amber by the dropping sun, he flicked a cigarette into the sea and checked his wristwatch. Knowing that a plane would arrive soon and release its torpedo, he stayed hidden. Though unafraid of bullets and soldiers, he didn't like the thought of plunging 30 feet into the water below, of being sucked deeply under that water, of having to swim a half-mile to an empty island. He consoled himself with the knowledge that if he lived, he'd spend the rest of his life enjoying the vast wealth that a series of betrayals had brought him. He'd have his fill of women and possessions and power, and, best of all, he would never have to obey orders again. The officer cared nothing for those he had killed or for those aboard Benevolence, the men and women whom he'd soon send to death. Occasionally, ruined faces haunted his dreams, but such torments weren't tangible enough to change his actions. People died in war, he reasoned, and if they died at his hand, so be it. He had ample cause to hate both Americans and Japanese, and over the past 9 months he'd happily killed people on each side of the conflict. Killing had become his greatest joy. Though his past deeds had led to the deaths of many, tonight his betrayal would destroy an entire ship. He eagerly awaited watching Benevolence burn, for he despised those who operated the vessel, and the thoughts of its commanding officers being forever silenced made him clench his fists with anticipation. Of course, he'd miss watching the nurses, miss the sights and scents and fantasies that they brought into his world. But the money and influence that his treachery would produce far outweighed anything that the opposite sex could offer. He'd been told there would be no survivors, and worried for his own safety, he fidgeted and quietly swore.